Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to Poland Daily History. Today we are at the Warsaw Citadel, a structure built by the Russians in the 1830s and later on used as a prison for political dissidents and fighters of the January uprising of 1863 to 1864. Some of the prisoners held here would later on become prominent figures in Polish politics, while others were executed or sent to Siberia after imprisonment. Today, we will talk to some of the experts about the specifics of the Citadel, the January uprising, and more history about the era. Our first guest is Michał Cieślak, junior custodian at the Museum of the 10th Pavilion in the Warsaw Citadel. Today, we will discuss more about the intricate details about the January uprising against the Russian Empire. So tell me, why did the Poles decide to rise up against the Russian Empire?
Główną przyczyną wydaje się być śmierć cara Mikołaja I.
The main reason seems to be the death of Nicholas I, known as the gendarme of Europe. His death seemed to allow for some breathing room. It appeared Russia might give way politically, that the Tsar's successor, Alexander II, would be more favorable to the Poles. Unfortunately, this wasn't the case. In 1856, the Tsar clearly stated, "There is no use dreaming or having any hope of independence, gentlemen." At the same time, the Crimean War erupted, a war lost by the Russians. It showed the weakness of the Russian Empire. So these two factors, the death of Tsar Nicholas and defeat in the Crimean War, caused Poles to reignite their dreams of independence and once again move to fight against their hated invader.
Are there any other events in Europe that eventually inspired Poland to rise up and conduct the uprising?
Without doubt, one event was the fight for Italian unification, known as Risorgimento. Poles were very inspired by General Garibaldi. They believed that if the Italians could unify their nation after hundreds of years, why wouldn't Poles be able to do it? Many Poles, such as Ludwik Mirosławski, tried to make contact with the Italians. A secret officers' school was even founded in Cuneo in Italy, later relocated to Genoa. Its task was to create new cadres for the uprising, not yet then known as the January uprising.
Were there any social tensions that eventually led to the uprising?
Palącą kwestią wydawało się uwłaszczenie chłopów. W 1861
A burning issue was the serfdom of the peasants. In 1861, on Tsar Alexander II's command, all peasants in the Russian Empire were emancipated, but this command didn't apply to the Kingdom of Poland and the so-called taken lands. The Polish peasants wondered what would happen, whether the Tsar would return this land, while future insurgents, the organizers of the January uprising, feared that if the peasants received land from the Tsar, they would lose any personal incentive to take part in the uprising, because no peasant, having his personal needs met by receiving land from the invader, would fight the Muscovites, not having any personal interest in battling against a far superior opponent. The thought process was that the opportunity for an uprising to erupt would come from the Polish authorities, giving peasants this land, who would in turn show their gratitude by taking part in the uprising.
Powstania się rzucą, no i okazując w ten sposób wdzięczność swoim nowym wyzwolicielom.
So I heard that one of the reasons why the Poles decided to carry out the uprising also has to do with the harsh conditions of conscriptions when it comes to the Russian army.
Not long before January 1863, the Russians came up with a satanic plan. Men between the ages of 16 and 30, so those seen as the most rebellious and most likely to take part in the uprising, were to be listed by name and enrolled into the Russian army. A certain panic erupted because in previous years all recruitment was drawn. You could pay your way out of it or find someone else to go in your place. This was supposed to be different. Here, young people, the blossom of the Polish nation, the most patriotic youth, most devoted to the fortunes of their country, were to end up in the Tsar's army for many years, because soldiers, after such recruitment, spent 25 years in the military barracks. They were actually lucky if they got to spend the entire period in the barracks. In terms of Polish soldiers, they were likely to be sent to the Caucasus, where the uprising of the Imam Shamil was still in progress. It was dying out, but there was still some rebellion in the Caucasus area. area. The Russians wanted to use Polish patriots to suppress the uprisings of other peoples. There was a fear of a repeat from Napoleonic times, when Poles who were supposed to fight for Poland's independence were redirected to San Domingo to suppress black rebels. It was one of the direct reasons, because the recruitment was carried out on the night of the 14th and 15th of January 1863, and the uprising erupted a week later on the night of the 22nd and 23rd of January, when it became obvious that the young people who avoided the recruitment were able to escape it had no way home, so were unable to count on help from their family, and so a dramatic choice had to be made: fight or run away. The Poles chose to fight.
The Russian Empire made the decision to construct a military strongpoint in Warsaw after the Polish November Uprising, which lasted from 1830 to 1831. During the January Uprising, Russians stationed 15,000 soldiers in the Warsaw Citadel, effectively keeping armed resistance in Warsaw to a minimum. Next up, we will talk to a historian, Dr. Krzysztof Jabłonka, about the role played by the peasantry in a January uprising. It takes a lot to take up arms and rebel against a regime. In your expert opinion, what do you think motivated the January uprising?
Polaków, jak i inne narody Rzeczypospolitej inspirowały dwie równoległe idee.
The Poles were inspired by two parallel ideas. The main one, to be independent. This was a permanent motive from the times of Kościuszko and never left the Poles. The most patriotic simply lived as if the invaders were not there. They tried to ignore the fact that there are foreign patrols on the streets, Cossack or Prussian ones in Poznań or Austrian ones in Krakow, while the second, after the ideal one, is the practical side, survival. The nation had to somehow survive slavery and consolidate. The most dangerous and hurtful problem in the Polish nation in the process of being reborn was the case of the peasants. Millions of peasants did not know they were Polish. They spoke Polish and prayed in Polish, but they lived in the area of their own village, or at furthest in a little town, and had no education and no awareness. These people had to be confronted, woken up with some message to save the country from the peasants being turned against the patriots of their own nation.
Trzeba było iść do tych ludzi, obudzić ich. Trzeba było z jakimś przesłaniem i uratować naród przed obróceniem owych chłopów przeciwko patriotom swojego narodu. To się nie udało w zaborze austriackim.
This didn't work in the Austrian partition, where at the last moment, 2 years before the spring of the nations, the great upheavals in the whole of Europe, the Austrian authorities directed the anger and hate of the simple peasant against their own countrymen, and they went to rob mansions and murder people. Ultimately, the governor committed a crime.
Ludzi ostatecznie tamtejszy gubernator posunął się do zbrodni, zaczął płacić.
He paid for the returning of nationals, dead or alive, sometimes even just for their severed heads. From that moment, nobody's head was safe, because it had a price of 5 guilders. It was feared that the Tsardom wanted to do the same on its own partition. Because of this, Polish patriots, a collection of intellectuals of the new generation, successors of those from the November Uprising from 1830 to 1831, wanted to prevent such a tragedy. It was obviously very dangerous, because the agricultural reform was halted. They decided to go to the peasants with a manifesto. If you support the uprising, if you regain your freedom, you will be free people in a free country. You will receive land, the greatest treasure of those times.
Jeżeli odzyskacie wolność, to będziecie wolnymi ludźmi w wolnym kraju. Dostaniecie ziemię, największy skarb owych czasów. I początkowo carat wyprzedził powstańców.
At the beginning, the Tsardom was ahead of the insurgents. The peasants didn't do anything. Those who did something were the intellectuals, the youth, the craftsmen, railway workers, officials. The nobility also wasn't particularly patriotic because they were concerned about their own property, although they did offer their sons and grandsons. It wasn't until the second part of the uprising that the peasants took part. They changed. They opened up to the insurgents and saw them as brothers. At this point, the commanders said the uprising could be ended. The Tsardom gave Poles exactly what the national government postulated. In short, it followed the command of the national government of the hidden secret state.
Mówiąc krótko, wykonał polecenie polskiego rządu narodowego, ukrytego, tajemnego państwa. I w ten sposób
In this way, the race for survival was won, although the battle for independence was lost. But it was the last battle lost. After this, there was success and independence.
sukcesy i niepodległość.
The January uprising was one of the most pivotal moments in the era when Poland was partitioned. The Poles would later on spend decades debating whether or not they had taken the correct path of resistance. During the interwar era, the veterans were treated as heroes, and they would later on serve as an inspiration for the soldiers fighting in the 1944 Warsaw Uprising. That's it for today. I'll see you next time on Poland Daily History.